I never imagined my quiet escape would become the center of a storm. For years, the cabin sat nestled in the valley like a secret only I knew. The silence was my refuge, the forest my company, the river my soundtrack. But peace is fragile when pride and power collide with truth and law. It all began on a Saturday morning that should have been ordinary. The valley was mine, not just the small wooden structure by the creek. I owned the ridges, the trees, the trails that wound through the mountains. The paperwork was clear, recorded, and validated long before trouble came. To me, the cabin was not just property, but a piece of my family's history. And yet, someone believed they had more authority than the deed itself. Her name was Karen, though I didn't know it at first. To me, she was simply a stranger with an inflated sense of control. The HOA she clung to had no true jurisdiction here, not on my land. Still, she marched onto my valley as though she were a general in battle. That was the day she decided to confront me at my own front door. I was splitting firewood when her SUV pulled up near the cabin. It was spotless, shiny, and out of place in the dirt of the mountains. The tires crunched against the gravel driveway I had laid myself. She stepped out, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand, jaw tight with purpose. Even before she spoke, I sensed she was here to cause trouble. "Excuse me?" she barked, striding closer without hesitation or respect. "This cabin is not approved by the Homeowners Association." Her words landed like bullets, sharp and meant to intimidate. I paused, set down the axe, and wiped the sweat from my brow, and I smiled, because I already knew where this was going. Said nothing at first, just let the silence breathe between us. Her face reddened, mistaking my calmness for defiance or insolence. Finally I spoke, my tone even and slow, deliberate as stone. "This is my property," I told her, pointing toward the valley beyond. "And the Homeowners Association has no claim here whatsoever." She scoffed, clicking her pen like it was a weapon in her hand. "You don't understand how this works," she shot back quickly. "This entire area is under HOA regulation, whether you like it or not." Her confidence would have been admirable if it weren't so misplaced. I knew something she didn't, and I was ready to show her. The cabin wasn't some squatter's hideout built in rebellion. It stood on surveyed land that had been mine for years. Not just this acre, but everything the valley cradled in its arms. Every pine, every stone, every mile of creek belonged to me. The deed was ironclad, the evidence undeniable and absolute. Karen didn't know, and ignorance made her bold and reckless. She leaned closer, waving her clipboard like a badge of authority. "You'll need to remove this structure immediately, or face penalties." Her voice trembled with the righteousness of someone drunk on rules. But the valley didn't answer to her, and neither did I. I walked to the porch, slow and steady, letting her follow me. The boards creaked under my boots, the sound echoing. Finality. From inside the cabin, I pulled out a thick leather folder. Within it, my father's handwriting, signatures, stamps, and surveys. The story of my land was written in ink long before she arrived. I laid the folder on the wooden railing, flipping it open wide. Maps unfolded, deeds revealed, notarized seals catching the sunlight. Karen squinted at the papers but refused to. Let her pride bend. Her lips tightened into a thin line, eyes darting but never reading. For her power was perception, not truth written on parchment. "You think a few papers mean anything?" she sneered bitterly. "This entire neighborhood is under HOA authority, no exceptions." I almost laughed at the absurdity, but chose patience instead. "Neighborhood?" I asked, motioning toward the trees and river. "There are no cul-de-sacs here, only wilderness and freedom." Her face flushed, but she held her ground like a stubborn mule. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat, not even in the face of law. Instead, she pulled out her phone and jabbed at the screen. "I'm calling the police," she announced, almost triumphant. It was as though she believed flashing lights would crown her queen. I leaned against the railing, unbothered, arms folded casually. The mountains loomed behind me, timeless guardians of truth. "Go ahead," I said softly, my voice like stone in the wind. "Call whoever you want. The valley isn't going anywhere." Her eyes narrowed, fire sparking with disbelief at my calmness. She dialed, her voice rising as she explained her false claim. "There's a trespasser here," she said, pacing with agitation. "He's building illegally on HOA land and refusing to leave." Each word was a lie, spoken like gospel through her teeth. But lies dissolve quickly when truth stands firm. In daylight, as she spoke, I prepared myself for the circus to come. Police didn't frighten me, not when I had everything in order. I had scanned documents, original deeds, and even video proof years of ownership had taught me to guard against. Doubters. Karen was just the latest in a line of people who tested me. I watched the road while she barked into her phone. Yes. Minutes stretched, the valley carrying only her grating voice. Birds still sang, the river still moved, time didn't falter. But soon, the crunch of tires echoed once again. Blue and red lights flashed across the pines like fire. The patrol car pulled up, dust rising behind its wheels. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting lightly near their belts. Their eyes shifted between Karen's flailing arms and my quiet stance. They had seen this dance before. Accusation against composure. Still, duty required them to ask questions, to play their role. The taller officer approached first, his tone measured and calm. "Sir, we received a call about a trespassing complaint here." Karen jumped in, waving her arms as though to prove her case. "That's him. He's building illegally on HOA land. Arrest him now." Her words tumbled out, shrill and desperate for validation. I kept my composure, pulling the folder close to my chest. "Officers," I said evenly, "I own this land, every acre of it." I laid the documents out on the railing for their inspection. The taller one leaned forward, scanning the notarized seals carefully. The younger officer tilted his head, curiosity overtaking suspicion. Karen stomped her foot like a child denied a toy. "Don't believe him. He forged those. This is HOA property." Her shriek echoed through the valley, scattering the nearby birds. But the taller officer raised a hand, silencing her tantrum. "Ma'am, we'll review the documents before making any judgment." I handed them survey maps, thick with stamps and signatures. Every line of boundary, every legal marker was plain to see. The officers traced the maps with their fingers, following the borders. Finally, the younger one let out a low whistle of surprise. This says you own the entire valley, not just the cabin." Karen froze, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The taller officer gave me a nod, professional yet respectful. "These documents check out," he said, tucking them neatly back. "This property is yours, sir, and no HOA rules apply. Here." His words landed like hammers against Karen's fragile empire. Her face turned crimson, disbelief boiling into furious denial. This can't be right. HOAs control everything in this region. She looked from one officer to the other, seeking support. But neither offered her the lifeline she so desperately wanted. They stood still, impartial but clearly convinced by the paperwork. I almost pitied her, standing there unraveling before strangers. Her power evaporated with every second of silence around her. She shuffled her papers, eyes darting like trapped. "Pray, then I'll take this to the board," she sputtered. It was the final hollow threat of a cornered tyrant. The officers exchanged a glance before turning back to me. "Sir, you're free to continue here as you please." One said, "If you encounter further harassment, keep record and let us know." Their words were calm, procedural, but carried a quiet warning. This wasn't their first run-in with someone like Karen, she fumed, clutching her clipboard to her chest defensively. Her SUV door slammed so hard it echoed off the cliffs. Spun, flinging gravel as she tore down the road. The sound of her retreat was almost comical in its drama. The valley was quiet again, but the story was far from over. I gathered my documents, sliding them back into the folder. The officers offered polite nods before returning to their car. Their cruiser rumbled away, fading into the forested distance. For a long moment, I stood still on the porch listening. The air was heavy with both relief and anticipation. Karen would be back. I knew it as surely as the sun rose. People like her didn't surrender. They regrouped and retaliated. The HOA board would hear her twisted version of the story. They'd plot, scheme, and look for cracks in my fortress. But the valley had always been strong, and so had I. The following week, a letter arrived tucked under my cabin door. It bore the Oz emblem at the top, stamped in deep blue ink. The letter claimed I owed membership fees and late penalties. I laughed aloud, the sound carrying across the empty valley. Their paper threats were as hollow as Karen's shrill protests. I pinned the letter to a corkboard inside, a trophy of sorts. Proof of their desperation, proof of their blindness to reality. They believed repetition could somehow overwrite recorded law, but my deed was a fortress, each page a stone in its wall, and no stack of HOA letters could ever breach that defense. Still, the harassment didn't stop, it only shifted form. Karen parked her SUV on the ridge, binoculars in hand. She sat for hours, staring as if she owned the air itself. Sometimes she snapped photos, the camera clicking like insects. Other times she simply glared, her rage visible from afar. I ignored her at first, choosing peace over confrontation. But every click of her camera was another provocation. Finally, I walked up the ridge, folder in hand once again. She rolled down her window, her lips already curling into venom. "Stalking my land won't change the truth," I told her firmly. She hissed back, her words dripping with bitter contempt. "You think this will last? The board will bury you in court." Her eyes were wild, pupils small, voice trembling with fury. It was no longer about rules or order, it was personal. Karen wanted victory, even if the battlefield was fantasy. I held up the deed once more, pointing at the valley below. "This isn't a game, and you're not the referee here." The paper fluttered in the breeze like a banner of truth. She turned away, slamming her car into gear, gravel flying. Her retreat was familiar now, but her persistence worried me. Within days, more envelopes appeared, each more aggressive. One threatened fines for illegal landscaping on common grounds. Another accused me of improper storage of recreational vehicles. Each accusation was a fabrication pulled from thin air. They piled up like fallen leaves, irrelevant but persistent. I documented everything, snapping photos and logging dates. My lawyer, a friend of my late father, advised patience. "Let them dig their own grave," he said over the phone. "They're bluffing, and when bluffers overplay, they collapse." His calmness steadied me, but Karen's obsession still loomed. At night, the valley was quiet, stars thick above the peaks. But in that silence, I sometimes felt the weight of her malice. It lingered in the shadows, in the crunch of tires unseen. Owning land meant owning solitude, but also defending it. And solitude is never safe when arrogance trespasses uninvited. 2 weeks later, another storm of conflict arrived at my door. This time, it wasn't just Karen, but 3 HOA members with her. They carried folders, wore matching polo shirts, and fake authority. It was a little parade of power marching up my driveway. Karen led them, her face smug with rehearsed determination. One man stepped forward, clearing his throat like a judge. "Sir, you are in violation of multiple HOA codes," he began, leaned against the porch post, letting his words pour out. Every sentence was a rehearsed lie, built on shifting sand. Waited until he was finished, then held up my deed. "This valley," I said slowly, "is not within your jurisdiction." My finger tapped the official boundary line on the survey map. "Your HOA ends 2 miles south at the county road. Everything beyond belongs solely to me, as proven here. So kindly take your rules back where they belong." Karen hissed, jabbing her finger toward my cabin with fury. "He's lying. He's manipulating documents. You can't trust him." But the other board members shifted uneasily at her tone. The maps, the seals, the notarized papers spoke louder than rage. Even her allies were beginning to question her crusade. Her desperation swelled, spilling over into another 911 call. Her voice shrieked into the phone, sharp as broken glass. "He's threatening us. He's refusing lawful orders from the HOA." But her companion stared, confused, realizing her delusion. It was no longer my fight. It was no longer my fight. It was her unraveling. The police arrived once more, lights flashing in the dusk. By now, they knew me, my deed, my valley, my truth. They greeted me with nods, professionalism mixed with familiarity. Then they turned to Karen, whose fury had reached hysteria. Her words cracked, her story collapsing under its own weight. "Ma'am," one officer said firmly, "this man owns the valley." His tone cut through her tirade, final as a slammed door. "You have no authority here. You must leave immediately." The silence afterward was heavier than any scream. Karen's face twisted, disbelief clashing with humiliation. Her board members retreated, her confidence shattered like glass. They mumbled excuses, avoided her gaze, shuffled toward the road. One by one, they abandoned her, leaving her exposed and alone. Her empire of false rules crumbled in the shadow of truth. Still, she glared at me with venomous hatred. I said nothing, only met her gaze with calm defiance. The valley didn't belong to her, never had, never would. She could write letters, scream threats, call every officer in town, but the land was mine, rooted in history deeper than her pride, and the mountains would remember long after her fury was gone. When the last car disappeared down the gravel road, silence returned. The river whispered, the owls stirred, the valley exhaled again. I sat on the porch, documents beside me, heart steady. Karen had thrown her worst, and still the valley held strong. But in my gut, I knew this was only the beginning. The lesson of that day carved itself deep into my mind. Property rights are more than papers, they are battles of will. HOAs thrive on fear, but fear is powerless against preparation. I understood then that peace is something we must defend, and I was ready, whatever storm might come next. For a while, silence returned, and I almost believed it was over. The cabin breathed with peace again, smoke curling from its chimney. Days passed without the sight of Karen's SUV on the ridge. I chopped wood, repaired the porch, and walked the trails. But beneath the quiet, I sensed the storm was gathering again. Karen was not the kind to surrender. It's not after such humiliation. Her pride was a beast that refused to die even when cornered. And pride is dangerous when fueled by a desperate thirst for control. She had lost the battle at my cabin, but not the war. I could almost feel her plotting from beyond the tree line. The first sign came in the form of a certified envelope. Unlike the previous letters, this one bore legal weight. Inside, a formal notice. I was being sued by the HOA. Their claim accused me of encroachment on communal land. A lie dressed in official language, sharp as a blade. I sat at the table, the envelope spread open before me. The words were absurd, but the seal at the bottom was real. They had filed in county court, determined to drag me through mud. It wasn't about truth. It was about pressure, money, and fear. Karen had turned to lawyers when intimidation had failed. I called my own. Attorney, a man named Fletcher. He was older now, but sharp as ever with a dry wit. After skimming the notice, he chuckled darkly to himself. They're bluffing again, but this time it'll cost them more. His confidence was a steady fire against the chill of worry. Still, lawsuits are heavy, even when you're in the right. The filing fees, the hearings, the paperwork, it all adds weight. Karen knew this, and that was her real weapon. She wanted to bleed me dry with inconvenience and expense. But I was determined not to bend beneath the strain. The first hearing was set for late autumn in town. I arrived early, suit pressed, folder in hand once again. Karen was already there, surrounded by 2 attorneys. Her smug smile widened when she saw me walk in. To her, the courtroom was another battlefield to conquer. When the judge entered, the room hushed into stillness. Karen's lawyers spoke first, voices smooth with false authority. They claimed my deed was in dispute. The valley misrecorded. Every word was smoke, twisting truth into something unrecognizable. But smoke vanishes when light is shined directly upon it. Fletcher rose with calm precision, his tone steady and sharp. He presented the original deeds, the maps, the surveys. He laid out timelines, signatures, and notarized confirmations. Piece by piece, he dismantled their fragile case. Karen shifted in her chair, her smile shrinking by degrees. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. I see no evidence that this property belongs to the HOA. His words cracked the courtroom like thunder rolling through canyons. Karen flinched, her lawyers exchanging uneasy glances. The truth had pierced their web of lies once again. Karen refused to accept the judge's words as final truth. Her fists clenched, nails digging into the arm of her chair. She whispered furiously to her lawyers, her face crimsoned with rage. But the judge had already moved on to dismissing the claim. With a firm gavel strike, the battle ended in my favor. Outside the courthouse, she confronted me like a storm. "You think this is over?" She spat, eyes blazing with hatred. "You'll regret ever building here. I'll make your life miserable." Her words carried no weight against the valley's silence within me. I simply walked away, her venom trailing uselessly in the air. But her war shifted beyond courts and legal papers. The HOA launched a smear campaign against my name. Flyers appeared in nearby towns, branding me a squatter. Posts spread online, accusing me of fraud and theft. It was a war of whispers, designed to corrode my reputation. Neighbors from the county began to ask questions quietly. Was I really who I claimed to be? They wondered. Karen's lies traveled faster than truth, as lies often do. And soon strangers looked at me with suspicion in their eyes. It stung, though my deed remained unshakably in my hands. I decided then to fight fire with fire, but with truth. I contacted the local paper, offering interviews and documents. A reporter came to the cabin, recorder and notebook ready. I showed her the valley, the maps, the history written within. She listened, wide-eyed, as I told the story of my fight. The article appeared 2 weeks later, bold headline above it. Owns entire valley despite HOA pressure. It spread through town like wildfire, undoing Karen's lies. People stopped me at the general store, offering nods of support. Truth, though slower, always finds its way to light. Karen raged in silence, her SUV no longer parked on ridges. But her absence was not surrendered, it was recalculation. She was plotting again, waiting for another opening to strike. Her pride was too poisonous to let the valley go. I could feel her eyes even when I could not see her. The next move came as winter draped the valley in white. Snow piled high, the cabin glowing warm with fire inside. Then, one morning, I found orange stakes in the ground. Markers hammered into the earth, bright against the frost. Karen had sent surveyors to redraw lines she didn't own. I followed the stakes, fury rising with every step. They cut across ridges, through trees, down to the creek. Each marker was a trespass, a symbol of defiance. At the far end, a man stood with a clipboard. He looked up, startled, as I approached with deliberate steps. "This is private land," I told him, my voice hard. He shifted uneasily, glancing down at his boots nervously. "Ma'am from the HOA hired me said this was disputed." I handed him a copy of the deed, laminated and clear. His face paled, realizing he'd been dragged into a feud. He pulled the stakes quickly, stuffing them back into his truck. "Didn't know, sir. Won't be back again," he assured me. His departure left only tire tracks fading in the snow. But the message was clear. Karen would stop at nothing. Her hands stretched greedily even into frozen ground. The Valley Inn. Winter was harsh, but beautiful in its silence. Snow covered every ridge like a white blanket of defiance. The cabin creaked under icy winds, but its hearth stayed strong. I chopped wood daily, stacking logs high against the storm. Peace existed even while Karen plotted somewhere beyond. But peace ended one night with the sound of engines. Headlights cut through the trees, bright against the snow. I peered from the window, heart steady but watchful. 2 trucks idled on the ridge, figures moving in shadows. They lingered, then vanished, leaving only tire tracks behind. The next morning, I found damage near the trail's edge. Fences broken, signs ripped out, boards scattered in drifts. It was deliberate, a warning etched in vandalism's hand. Karen's war had turned from paper to petty destruction. Her reach was growing darker as winter pressed harder. I called the sheriff, documenting every mark of trespass. He arrived in a county truck, notebook balanced in hand. After surveying the wreckage, he sighed with weary patience. We've had complaints from her before, he muttered quietly. Keep records. Courts like evidence, not just accusations. His advice was sound, though my frustration boiled hotter. Owning the valley wasn't the hard part, defending it was. Each day I wondered what she'd try next, what scheme brewed. But fear never took root here, only vigilance and resolve. The valley had chosen me, and I wouldn't abandon it. Days later, Karen returned, this time with police again. She accused me of illegally cutting timber on HOA land. I laughed, holding up my axe like a badge of honor. These logs? It's from my own trees, on my own land? The officer nodded, unimpressed with her hollow charge. Her fury reached a fever, pitch words spilling uncontrollably. He's a menace. He's ruining everything. You have to stop him. But her voice cracked, desperation bleeding through her bravado. The officer turned, his tone calm but edged with finality. Ma'am, you need to stop wasting county resources. That sentence hit her harder than any gavel ever could. Her eyes widened, lips trembling, fury choking her speech. For once, she was the one cornered by authority. She stormed away, her SUV fishtailing in snowy gravel. The silence she left behind was almost triumphant to hear, yet I knew this wasn't her end, was her pause. Karen's pride was a wounded animal, dangerous and unpredictable. She would retreat, heal, and come back with sharper claws. The valley had endured storms greater than her before. And I was ready. Whatever shape her next attack would take, the thaw of late winter brought a new kind of trouble. A county vehicle rolled up my driveway, tires crunching loudly. An inspector stepped out, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. I'm here to follow up on reported code violations, he said. The words dripped with Karen's influence, familiar and false. I guided him across the property, showing every corner. With pride, the cabin was sound, the trails clear, the land untouched. He checked structures, tested wiring, examined firewood stacks. At last he sighed, setting his pen down against the page. There's nothing wrong here. Someone is wasting our time. I knew exactly who that someone was, though he didn't say. The inspector shook my hand firmly before leaving the valley. Karen's attempts were becoming more desperate, more transparent. But still, each one cost me time, patience, and energy. Her strategy was simple: exhaustion through endless disruption. Spring arrived, the valley blooming back to vibrant life. Wildflowers dotted the ridges, bees humming in quiet joy. But joy was cut short when letters returned to my door. This time, the HOA demanded retroactive fees for services rendered. What services could they possibly claim in a wilderness valley? They argued road maintenance, trash disposal, community security patrols. All lies, as none of their services reached my valley. Still, they threatened liens, fines, and court action once more. Their arrogance grew, even in the face of repeated defeat. Karen's fingerprints were smeared across every page of it. Fletcher, my lawyer, laughed when I showed him the stack. They're bluffing again, but this is harassment now, he said. He drafted a counter notice, crisp and cutting like winter air. Cease and desist, with threat of legal damages attached. The HOA board was officially placed on defense, but Karen wouldn't stop, even as her board wavered. She prowled the edges of my land, binoculars in hand. Sometimes she took pictures, sometimes she just stared. Her obsession was no longer about property, it was personal. I had become her enemy, her rival, her shadow war. One evening, I spotted her near the riverbank trespassing. I strode down, boots crunching against the gravel and mud. She froze, startled, then quickly raised her phone. To record harassment, she shrieked, though I hadn't touched her. She weaponized false victimhood, twisting truth into a spectacle. I calmly raised my own phone, recording her in return. To cameras, to stories, but only one truth beneath it. She ranted wildly, her voice carrying through the quiet valley. Won't last here? The HOA always wins eventually. Her words rang hollow against the endless strength of the hills. When she finally left, I reviewed the footage in silence. Her hysteria was captured, her lies crumbling in digital record. This was my shield now, as strong as any deed. Proof not just of ownership, but of her harassment. The valley itself had become the stage of evidence. The breaking point came on. A stormy night in late spring, rain hammered the valley, thunder rolling like drums of war. Through the sheets of water, headlights appeared once again. Karen's SUV crawled up the driveway, windshield wipers frantic. She wasn't alone. 2 board members sat stiffly beside her. I stepped onto the porch, rain slicking my jacket in seconds. Her window rolled down, her face pale but eyes fierce. "This is your last chance," she shouted above the storm. "Sign over the cabin and leave before we make you." Her words were madness, hollow threats wrapped in lightning. I held up the deed laminated against the rain. "This land is mine," I called back, my voice firm. "No board, no false rules, no intimidation will change that." The storm itself seemed to pause at my defiance. For a moment, only rain filled the heavy silence. Karen's composure cracked, fury boiling out in trembling screams. "You'll regret this. You'll wish you never came here." She slammed the gas, tires spinning mud into the night. Her SUV fishtailed before disappearing down the valley road. Even her companions looked shaken by her unraveling rage. The next day, county deputies knocked on my cabin door. They carried reports of violent threats filed against me. Karen had accused me of aggression, of dangerous behavior, but my recordings told a very different story altogether. Video proof cleared me within minutes, her lies collapsing again. The deputies left, apologetic, promising to file a complaint. They warned me Karen was reaching the edge of obsession. "Keep your camera ready," one of them advised gravely. "She's not thinking rationally anymore, and that makes her risky." Their words lingered long after their cruiser disappeared. 4 days after, the valley was eerily quiet, almost too still. No SUVs, no letters, no shadows moving on the ridges. It was as though Karen had vanished into the storm. But silence is never safety, it is the breath before chaos. And I knew another strike was surely on the horizon. I spent evenings walking the land, grounding myself in truth. Every tree, every rock, every bend of the creek was mine. The valley was more than paper and stamps, it was home. Defending it wasn't just about law, but about belonging. And belonging was something no HOA could ever steal. That night I sat by the fire, flames reflecting in glass. The deed lay open on the table, steady as scripture. Karen had thrown everything at meal letters, lawsuits, lies. But the valley stood unchanged, eternal against her storm. And so did I, resolute in the shadow of mountains. Chapter 2 closed. With thunder still echoing in the distance, Karen was beaten but not gone, wounded yet still dangerous. The HOA's grip had loosened, their allies shaken and tired. But her pride remained festering, plotting in quiet corners. And I braced myself, knowing war was far from over. The weeks that followed were deceptively calm, almost too quiet. Karen's SUV no longer prowled the ridges, no inspectors appeared. For a while, it felt like the storm had finally passed. I split logs, hiked trails, and let the valley breathe again. But silence is never pasit, is preparation for the next strike. Then the letters began again, thicker than before, stamped. Official. This time, they bore the seal of a federal district court. Karen had filed yet another lawsuit, grander than the last. She claimed environmental violations, mismanagement of waterways, illegal forestry. It was a scattershot attack, desperate yet designed to overwhelm. Fletcher laughed when he read the thick stack of claims. "She's reaching into thin air," he said, flipping through pages. "None of this will hold, but she's betting on pressure." Could see it in his eyes. Knew her kind. Bullies use courts like weapons, even when truth isn't theirs. Still, the weight of it pressed on my chest. Every new accusation was another rope tying me down. Even lies leave scars when repeated often enough in ink. Karen was trying to bury me under paper and stress. But I had learned, proof is the strongest weapon of all. I gathered records, receipts, surveyor notes, even photographs of streams. Every corner of the valley became part of my defense. Fletcher assembled it like a fortress of fact and truth. When the court day came, I carried boxes of evidence. Karen arrived with arrogance, dressed in victory before it came. The judge listened. Patiently, though exhaustion lined his eyes. Karen's lawyers spun tales of rivers polluted and wildlife displaced. But no proof came, only stories woven from thin, angry air. When Fletcher presented my evidence, silence filled the courtroom. The truth was too heavy to be denied this time. The case was dismissed within an hour, the gavel sharp. Karen's face burned red, her lips quivering with silent fury. The board members beside her slouched, weary of her obsession. Outside, reporters gathered again, microphones eager for a soundbite. Karen stormed past them while Fletcher calmly told the truth. The article the next day sealed another nail in her coffin. Court dismisses HOA lawsuit. Valley owner vindicated. Readers flooded the comment sections with outrage at her antics. Strangers began to rally behind me, tired of HOA tyranny. Karen was becoming a symbol of everything people despised. But symbols are dangerous when pride is their foundation. Karen didn't Crumbacher doubled down with reckless ambition. If courts couldn't remove me, then maybe force would. Her eyes now carried something darker than irritation or pride. I began to sense danger not just to property but life. That night, movement stirred outside the cabin past midnight. Shadows flickered across the window, boots crunching in gravel. I grabbed the lantern and stepped into the cold air. Two men froze near the shed, tools in their hands.
Oh.
One dropped a crowbar, the other clutched a gas can. They bolted when they saw me, sprinting into the woods. The valley swallowed their footsteps, leaving silence behind. But their intent was obvious. This wasn't random trespassing. Karen had escalated from words and lawsuits to sabotage. And now, fire had nearly become her weapon of choice. I reported the incident, deputies combing the woods in vain. They found tire tracks leading back toward the county road. No arrests were made, though suspicion pointed to Karen's orbit. The sheriff warned me to stay vigilant and keep cameras ready. The valley was no longer just a home, it was a target. The attempt at arson changed everything in the valley. Up until then, it had been about paper and pride. But now, Karen had stepped into the realm of danger. A fire spread here, the whole valley could vanish overnight. Her feud threatened not just me, but the land itself. I reinforced the cabin with cameras and motion sensors. Signs warned trespassers that the land was monitored constantly. I hated turning home into a fortress, but survival demanded it. Even Fletcher urged me to escalate matters legally and quickly. This isn't civil anymore, it's criminal, he warned sternly. The sheriff began patrols through the valley. On occasion, deputies left tire tracks near the river and trailheads. It felt both comforting and unsettling, their presence always nearby. The valley had never needed guardians before. It thrived freely. But now law and land stood together against her madness. Karen, however, adapted like a cornered animal in a trap. She stopped appearing herself and instead sent others forward. Teenagers hired to harass men, loitering with excuses ready. They littered near the trailheads, left trash at my gates. Every move was designed to erode, chip, and wear me down. I filmed everything, every soda can, every trespasser's steps. The camera became my shield, my valley's silent witness. Without proof, her lies thrived, but with it they crumbled. Uploaded clips online, faceless accounts sharing the evidence. Soon, strangers called me the valley owner in solidarity. Karen must have seen the posts, for she grew quieter. But silence from her was always a harbinger of storms. Her rage didn't vanish, it fermented, simmering beneath the surface. Neighbors whispered that even the HOA board feared her now. She had gone rogue, obsessed beyond even their tolerance. One afternoon, I received a letter by certified mail. It wasn't from Karen or the HOA, but from lawyers. Development company now claimed interest in Valleyland. Apparently Karen had been shopping around fake property rights. She was trying to sell what she didn't even own. The audacity of it stunned even Fletcher, who nearly laughed. They won't get farted searches, kill this nonsense quick. Still Still, the fact that she tried revealed her desperation. When control slipped, she sought chaos through any available door. She was spiraling, but dragging others into her. Madness. I confronted her one final time at the HOA meeting. The room was packed, board members shifting nervously in chairs. Karen sat like a queen, her glare fixed upon me. When I presented the deed aloud, silence swallowed the hall. "Your reach ends here," I said firmly, voice steady as stone. Karen laughed, sound brittle, cracking under its own weight. "You think this paper means anything? We built this place." Her words spilled fury, but her allies recoiled in shame. Even the board president finally spoke, voice hushed but clear. "This is not our fight anymore, Karen. You've gone too far." Her face blanched, rage boiling into something close to despair. She stormed out, slamming the door with thunderous finality. The board members turned toward me, offering apologies quietly. They admitted she acted without their consent or authority. In truth, they feared her more than they supported her. But apologies didn't fix fences, replace signs, or stop fires. It was too late for neighborly words or shaky handshakes. Karen had crossed a line where trust could never return. The valley needed protection stronger than HOA politics allowed. I knew then her downfall would come from her own hand. Summer arrived. Dry and brittle as parchment under the sun, the valley shimmered with heat, rivers thinning to silver threads. One spark could turn it into a furnace within minutes. That knowledge haunted me, especially after the Gaskin incident. Karen's obsession and fire season were a dangerous combination. Then came the night when alarms shattered my sleep. Cameras triggered, lights flashing across screens by the front door. I grabbed my boots, rushing out with lantern in hand. Smoke curled near the northern ridge, faint but unmistakable. Someone had tried again, and this time fire caught. I sprinted uphill, heart pounding, shovel in one hand. The flames licked dry grass, crawling toward the tree line. Adrenaline surged as I fought them with dirt and water. Hours passed before deputies arrived with backup and hoses. Together we smothered the blaze, black scars carved in earth. The next morning, the sheriff delivered the news personally. Footprints matched tires leading straight to Karen's property line. Witnesses had spotted her SUV near the ridge at night. This time, excuses couldn't save her, nor false accusations. Arson was no longer HOA. Drama was a felony. Karen was arrested within the week, her empire crumbling. News spread fast, headlines branding her, the HOA arsonist. The board disowned her publicly, distancing themselves completely. Went from queen of the neighborhood to pariah overnight. Her reign ended not in triumph, but in humiliation. Still, victory felt bittersweet as I surveyed charred hillsides. The valley had survived, but scars marred its ancient skin. It would take years for grasses to regrow fully. Her feud had left wounds not just in me, but nature. And that truth stung sharper than any insult she hurled. Fletcher urged me to sue. For damages and restitution, we filed claims for harassment, trespass, and attempted arson. The weight of evidence crushed any defense she had left. Her fortune dwindled under lawyer fees and settlements combined. For once, consequences finally caught up with her pride. Life slowly returned to rhythm as weeks turned into months. Birds nested again, streams filled after late summer rains. Rebuilt fences, reseeded scorched patches, and walked daily. The valley breathed easier without her shadow looming overhead. Still, echoes of her voice lingered in memory's corners. One autumn evening, I stood on the porch watching sunset. Golden light spread across the valley, warm and forgiving. For the first time in years, true peace settled in.
Ow.
No SUVs, no letters, no false accusations remained. Only the steady pulse of land and sky remained. The lesson etched itself deeper than any scar on earth. Land is more than property. It's trust, responsibility, belonging. HOAs, Karens, and courts are fleeting, but soil is eternal. The valley had tested me, and I had endured. Strength wasn't in fighting, but in refusing to surrender. As leaves fell, I sent one last letter to Fletcher. It wasn't about lawsuits, or evidence or battles anymore. It was a deed copy, framed for his office wall. For standing with me, I wrote, and with the valley. He'd earned a place in its story as much as me. Chapter 3 closed not with thunder, but with silence. Karen was gone, her reign of harassment shattered forever. The HOA, once menacing, had shrunk into meekness. The valley remained scarred, yet unbroken, stronger than before. And so did I, keeper of its endless story.